Okay. Now I think I need to switch off the transcription. Okay, now I've gotten that done. Before I proceed, I need to find out if you guys are hearing my voice. So, good afternoon, students.
Good afternoon.
Okay, so at this point, I want to find out if you guys are seeing this slide. Are you seeing the slides?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we can see the screen.
Yes, please.
Yes.
Okay, so with that, I have to proceed to disable your mics so that there will be no noise interruption at all until I'm ready to, until I see someone's hands raised. So if anyone wants to say something, please raise your hand and then I would enable your microphones again. So let's proceed. Today we are looking at causal reasoning, Unit 9. And as you know, this is a course that deals with the different ways we reason about issues. At this point, you are supposed to, be able to have trained yourself on the procedures of deductive and inductive reasoning. So now, having established familiarity with deductive and inductive reasoning, we now proceed to look at causal reasoning. Now, causal reasoning is a type of inductive reasoning that focuses on causal relationships. So as we move on, it will become clear to you that causal reasoning is one type of inductive reasoning. Why is it inductive reasoning? Because it is not accurate. It doesn't have the accuracy of mathematics. Looking for causes and effects is in the realm of probability. There is no, arithmetic exactness about it. Reasoning from cause to effect and sometimes from effect to cause. What causes what? How do we know it is the cause? Now we have to begin by understanding different senses of the word cause. First of all, we have proximate cause, which is the immediate cause of something, even if that thing has more remote and foundational causes. Example, Samson decided to become an armed robber. They put him in a situation where he engaged in a shootout with the police and the police killed him. So this is the proximate cause of Samson's death. His decision to become an armed robber is the proximate cause of his death. But there are other kinds of causes, contributory cause, a cause among many other causes. Example, when you hear about a contributory cause, it means there are other causes as well, and it is just one of them. Example, a distressed economy contributed to Samson's decision to become an armed robber and hence to end up being killed by the police. So among several causes of Samson's death, a distressed economy is one of them. Necessary cause or cause as necessary condition. When something is a necessary condition for another thing, without it, the other would not exist. Example, without oxygen, life is impossible. No oxygen, no life. That's how you know a necessary cause. It has to be a necessary condition for something. Without it, that thing will not be there. Sufficient cause or cause as sufficient condition. Something could be a sufficient condition for an effect if the presence of that thing is adequate for the presence of the effect. One does not need to express doubt at seeing the effect when she sees the condition. So this is not about necessity, it's about adequacy. Give me a few seconds. Let me respond to someone calling. Okay, so this is not about necessity, it's about adequacy. Now, adequacy is different from necessity. Something is a sufficient cause if it is adequate, not just necessary, but adequate as well. Example, to be prevented from inhaling oxygen for 20 minutes is sufficient condition for death. To be prevented from inhaling oxygen for 20 minutes is sufficient condition for death. Now let's look at another example of sufficient cause, proving that a healthy and sane person calculatedly committed a murder is an adequate condition for sentencing the person to life imprisonment. If this is, so my small window tends to stand in the way. Okay, so proving that a healthy and sane person calculatedly committed a murder is an adequate condition for sentencing the person to life imprisonment if this is the appropriate sentencing for such a crime in that jurisdiction. Okay, so in order to be very clear about the difference between necessary cause and sufficient cause, let's look at this. Individually necessary and jointly sufficient condition. We can say that there are several individually necessary conditions for an effect, and that a combination of these conditions becomes sufficient for the effect. In life and in science, it is usually difficult to determine what number of causes are sufficient for an effect to occur. Now look at this. So this should clarify this problem. Example, oxygen, water, food, and health are independently necessary conditions for a human being to stay alive. But all this, oxygen, water, food, health, and some other factors we may not know yet, are sufficient for staying alive. So this should clarify your difficulty about necessary and sufficient conditions. You can see how sufficient conditions differs from necessary condition. Something is necessary condition if it must be present. It may be present, but it is not sufficient. So without oxygen, there will be no life. But oxygen is not the only thing you need for life. Oxygen may be there, but without another necessary condition, there's still no life. So you need a number of necessary conditions, and then you have life. Without any of them, the life is not there. So the adequacy is what we call, the adequacy condition is what we call the sufficient condition. When all that is necessary for life have assembled together, then you have life. That's what we call sufficient condition. Probabilistic cause. This is the opposite of necessary cause. This kind of cause is theoretically not necessary, not a must for the effect. Example, a crisis-ridden economy, the lack of a job, and the need to marry and settle down are probable causes of Samson's decision to become an armed robber. So probabilistic cause is the opposite of necessary cause. It must not be there for the effect to occur. A crisis-ridden economy, the lack of a job, the need to marry and settle down, these were causes of Samson's decision to marry. Now they are probable causes because they are not necessary. Most of us existed under or experienced a crisis-ridden economy, lack of job, need to marry and settle down. Almost everybody have seen a crisis-ridden economy, lacking job, needing to marry, but not everybody decided to become an armed robber. So none of these causes is necessary. We call them probabilistic. Okay. Causal agent as cause. A causal agent is also a cause. Example, Clement is the cause of the crisis. So causal agent has to do with human beings or creatures that actively cause something. Then we have causal chain and causal web. Causal chain is when there are so many causes, each one leading to another. And then causal web is when the relationship between causes is more like a web than a chain. Now, two contributory causes could occur simultaneously. That's what we call causal web. Now, example of a causal chain. Samson graduated but couldn't find a job. He then attempted self-employment but did not show enough determination to succeed in his chosen craft. Self-employment. He didn't succeed. Then he went to a bar one day and met a friend who introduced him to a gang. Samson agreed to join the gang because he was hungry and out of cash. He joined the gang and became an armed robber. He and his gang had a number of successful, but on one of those escapades, they ran into the police. There was a shootout and Samson was killed. Samson was shot. Samson was rushed to the hospital where he died of gunshot injury. So this is one long chain of causes from unemployment down to shootout with police. One thing leading to another. That's what we call a causal chain. Now let's look at the causal web. Causal web, example, it could be that the police officer who killed Samson did so because he's the officer, aimed his gun correctly, whilst his colleagues did not. And at the same time, Samson got killed because he squeezed his trigger to kill the police person before the police killed him and found that there were no more bullets in the firing chamber of his gun. So all these things were occurring at the same time. The policeman wanted to shoot Samson. Samson wanted to shoot the policeman. They did so at once. The only difference is that the policeman had bullet. Samson did not have bullet. So the person who had bullet in his gun succeeded in killing the other person. But they all happened at the same time. So that's causal web. Okay, just give me a few seconds. Okay, so let's do a little exercise. I can trace Ronaldo's victory all the way to an advice his father gave him when he was a child. This is an example of what? Anyone? Yeah, Hamidu Haruna, let me allow your mics. Okay, so now you can put on your mic. Hamidu. Hamidu, and then Brown. Brown, do you want to answer?
Sir, please have contributory cause. Yes, sir.
Okay. Any other opinion?
Come, please.
Yeah, you said contributory. So I'm asking if there's any other answer from anyone else. Let me see. You have Josephine. Josephine, do you want to say something?
Yes, please.
Come
Sir,
again.
please, I think. Hello.
You have to be louder.
Okay. So, please, I think is probabilistic cause because it's obviously the necessary cause. Without it, it's the sentence is okay without it.
Okay. So when you see the phrase all the way, when you see the phrase all the way, then that suggests to you that it's causal chain. You have to examine the wordings of the sentence very closely. And so all the phrase all the way gives away the examiner's own preference. All right. So you can see that the number of answers could be quite credible, but the best way to decide which one is it is to look at the question very carefully, and then you see from the way the question was worded, you see the answer. USA has a hand in the ousting and killing of Patrice Lumumba. This is an example of a so that should be simple. Look at the sentence carefully. Look at the sentence carefully, and that tells you the answer.
Which course?
Come again.
Proximate course.
Yeah, contributory cause. So the phrase has a hand tells you that there are multiple causes. Has a hand means that there is one cause and it's not the only one. Has a hand means has a hand will tell you it's contributory cause. You need to at least pay a house rent if you wish to live in that house. This is an example of you need to at least pay a house rent if you want to live in that house.
Necessary course.
Necessary cause. You are correct. So when you look at the question, at least, at least, at least tells you it's necessary cause. Are you aware that the lady you dated is the reason why you did not do well in your exams? This is an example of this is not difficult at all. Come again.
Probabilistic cause.
In this case, you are dealing with a human being, a lady. So since it is a lady or a human being, that's a causal agent. Okay, a lot of factors contributed to the emergence of the idea of multiculturalism. A lot of factors contributed to the emergence of multiculturalism. First, World War II ended with the defeat of the Nazis, who wanted to conquer the world and put everyone under a single ideology. So that's first. Second, it was the era of independence, and most former colonies were acquiring their independence, which was a message of equality and mutual tolerance. Then, third, Black Americans, African Americans in America were demanding for respect and equal treatment. And then, fourth, the United Nations had made a declaration on the fundamental human rights. This is an example of
Causal web.
Causal web. You are correct. So all these things were happening at the same time. They were happening simultaneously. So it's a causal web. She died because she drank a heavy dose of poison. This is an example of what? Evans.
Sufficient cause.
Necessary cause.
Azuma, language bang, and a go, the word go, a girl. Ah, girl. Which I say, word, you know. Just that she, which I say.
She drank a heavy dose of poison, dying from a heavy dose of poison. That sounds more like sufficient cause. It sounds more like sufficient cause. Remember, we gave an example that is almost exactly like this. We had said that being prevented from inhaling oxygen for at least 20 minutes is sufficient cause for death. And then this is another one. Drinking a large dose of poison is sufficient cause of death as well. So that ends our treatment of the various senses of the word cause. And that was an introductory part of the topic of causal reasoning. Now we have to look at causal reasoning. And now we're going to look at, the types of causal reasoning. Now, causal reasoning is a type of inductive argument attempting to establish the causal relationship between phenomena or events. A causal claim indicates that something causes another. A causal hypothesis is an initial speculation made in relation to a causal claim, a supposition offered as a starting point for further investigation. Now, we're going to study two things. First of all, we'll look at various informal causal reasoning strategies for arriving at causal claims. Now, we said a causal claim indicates that something causes another. When you say this is a cause, you have made a causal claim. How do we arrive at causal claims? When you say that this caused this, how did you arrive at that? So there are ways your mind or your brain identifies causes on a daily basis. So we want to look at those ways. There are three of them, three fundamental ones. Actually, John Stuart Mill had said there are five, but rather we want to look at three very important ones. So that's what we mean by the first thing we want to do, to study two things. First, the various informal causal reasoning strategies. Now, the informal causal reasoning strategies are those strategies that we human beings employ every day, from the moment we woke up to the moment we go back to sleep, identifying causes. The informal ways we identify causes. And then the second thing to study, the various experimental strategies for arriving at causal hypothesis. But that's not for this semester. So we're not going to study that today. We'll just look at the various informal causal reasoning strategies for arriving at causal claims. John Stuart Mill, in his book titled A System of Logic, 1893, propounded 5 approaches for detecting causation by observation. Now we shall study 3: the relevant difference reasoning, the common thread reasoning, and then a concomitant variation reasoning. So this 3. Let's begin with the relevant difference reasoning. This is the method of reasoning that identifies something that occurred differently from others as the cause of an effect. Relevant difference reasoning. Look at the name of the reasoning. Relevant difference reasoning. A method of reasoning that identifies something that occurred differently from others as the cause of an effect. A is the difference among the others. So A caused the effect. Example: I've always taken tea and bread for my breakfast, but on a certain day last month, I fell sick shortly after my breakfast. I treated the illness and fell sick again last week after my breakfast. I asked myself why I have fallen sick on these 2 occasions after breakfast. And then it occurs to me that on these 2 occasions, I had taken some product with the breakfast. I checked the information provided on the product, and I saw it has expired long ago. So I suspect that this is the reason why I've fallen sick twice. Since I've always taken tea and bread without any implications throughout my life, it means that this expired marmalade becomes the relevant difference in explaining the possible cause of the 2 illnesses. So I've been taking tea and bread for as long as I can remember without any issues. And then suddenly I take tea and bread and I fall sick. I treat it and fall sick again after taking tea and bread. And then I decide to look more closely at the tea and bread I'm taking. And then I discover there is, a butter or a marmalade that I've been putting on the bread. I check the expiry date and then I see it as expired. Now that product is something different from what I've been doing. It is relevantly different. It is different from what I've been doing in a relevant way. That is, it is a relevant difference, or it is different in a way that is relevant to explaining what is happening to me. It is different from what I've been doing, therefore, it is relevant in explaining the new thing that has been happening to my body. Let's look at common thread reasoning. This is a method of reasoning that identifies something that occurred in all the instances that have led to a particular effect. A method of reasoning that identifies something that has occurred in all the instances that have led to a particular effect. A is a common thread among all the events. So A is the cause. A is a common thread among all the events. So A is the cause. Example, when I bought the marmalade some months ago, I had gone shopping in the company of my neighbors, and we had all bought the same product, which expired at the same time. Now, assume my neighbors are equally sick. They also trace the cause of their illnesses to the expired marmalades. It means we have all identified the expired marmalade as a common thread in all of these particular illnesses in the neighborhood. So, assuming that when I went to buy the expired product, I was also in the company of my neighbors, and we all bought it, and it has been causing problems in the neighborhood. And then one of us, like me, discovers that it is a relevant difference that explains my illness during my tea and bread breakfast. And then I suggest it to the others too, and others also begin to discover that it is a difference that is relevant to explaining their own problems on an individual basis. At the end of the day, that expired product is the common thread running through all the cases of this particular illness in the neighborhood. Concomitant variation. This is a method of identifying the degree of occurrence of something rather than its simple presence or absence. Concomitant variation. The method of identifying the degree of occurrence of something, the degree of occurrence, rather than simple presence or absence. Now, we use it when we cannot eliminate a particular cause from the environment. Example, carbon dioxide. So it is useless to use relevant difference to explain carbon dioxide as a cause of ill health. Now, relevant difference and even common thread are used when a cause can be absent from an environment. They are only used when a cause can be present or absent. But if a cause is always present and can never be absent, and then you suspect it is causing something, then it means it is not the presence of that thing that is causing something. It is the degree of the presence. That's when you use concomitant variation. So it is useless to use relevant difference to identify carbon dioxide as a cause of ill health. You would rather use a method that measures its degree or intensity, since it is always present. Example, it was revealed through research that high blood pressure is exacerbated in regions whose soils have low levels of selenium. So high blood pressure is, high blood pressure is more in those places where there is low level of selenium in the soil. This is a metal that exists in tiny quantities in every soil, and because of this, we cannot measure for its absence or presence. So selenium is present in every soil. So if you suspect selenium is causing something in a town or a location, then it is not its presence that is causing it, is the degree of presence, the quantity. We can only account for the effects of varying degrees of it, and hence the discovery that it seems correlative with the ability of our bodies to keep our blood pressure normal. Second example, it was discovered that high levels of sulfur dioxide pollution in the air was responsible for high rates of deaths in London between November and December 1952. Now, there's no way to eliminate sulfur dioxide from the air. So the experiment discovered the causal connection by comparing the increase and decrease of the effect, which is the number of deaths per day, to the variation in degrees of sulfur dioxide in the air. Now, sulfur dioxide is always in the air, but it was suspected it was causing deaths in London some time ago. Now, how do you measure it? How do you confirm that it is causing those deaths? Is it by determining the presence in the air? No, it is present in every air, any air around the world, any atmosphere around the world. So you can only know it is causing something bad or something good by measuring the degree. So these guys were, recording the number of deaths per day. On day 1, 20 people died, and this was a degree of sulfur dioxide in the air. On day 2, 40 people died, and this is the degree of sulfur dioxide in the air. On day 3, 10 people died, and this is the degree of sulfur dioxide in the air, and so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, they will check whether the level of sulfur dioxide was higher on the day that more people died. If the level of sulfur dioxide was higher on the day that more people died, and then the sulfur dioxide was less on the day less people died, then it means that it is the degree of sulfur dioxide that was causing the problem. Now, let's entertain ourselves again to some exercises. Kofi has had accidents with 6 of his cars in the last 3 months. Kofi has had accidents with 6 of his cars in the last 3 months. This is an example of what? Brown.
Yes, sir. Please, a common thread.
Yeah, common thread. That's good. So how did you arrive at that answer?
Because it is something that is happening to him within the last 3 months. It's something that keeps repeating itself.
Or rather, you will say that Kofi is the common thread running through the entire 6 accidents in 3 months.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
All right, then. There's an unspoken understanding that those who were trained in European and American universities are better equipped for their jobs and should be given more promotions. This is an example of what? Yasmin. Or Elizabeth.
Relevant difference.
Relevant difference. Is that Elizabeth?
Yes, please.
So how did you arrive at your answer?
Because those who are trained in European countries, they are different from those who were trained in American countries, but they are all the cause of the effects. Yes. So that's really right.
Let me see. Wouldn't you rather say? Wouldn't you rather say that being trained abroad is the common thread running through all these cases? So the thing is, when there are more than one cases, when there is more than one case, then you have to ask yourself first of all if it is common thread. And in these cases, you have A whole lot of people who have been trained abroad, and now something is being said about them. So it means that that thing is a common thread running through them. You know. So it is either a common thread or false common thread if you agree with the assumption or not, or rather, if you agree with the understanding or not. I mean, if you agree with the understanding, then that's common thread. If you don't, then that's false common thread. But of course, because nobody admits it, because no one admits it, and nobody will even be proud to admit this understanding, then we say it's false common thread. So we'll get to that. We'll get to false common thread very soon. Your computer is more likely to last longer if it's an Apple product. This is an example of anyone. Yeah, so go ahead. Put on your mic.
Relevance difference.
Okay, why do you think it's a relevant difference?
Because there are so many other computers, so I'm sure they have done their investigation and they have found out that if it is Apple, the Apple one specifically, that will last longer. So is the difference among all the other types of computers.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. So relevant difference is a serious contender for the right answer. Now, but when you look at the question, you see the phrase more likely. You see the phrase more likely. Now, more likely suggests to you that your computer might not actually last longer if it's an Apple. You know, the lasting longer depends not just, on the product, but on some other factors. But so that's why they use more likely. That if there's a case where an apple doesn't last more than another one, then they wouldn't like to be blamed. Okay, now, but that's a different issue. Let's look at what the answer should be. Why will a computer last longer than another computer? That takes you down to the materials used to build a computer. The materials. Now, if one, if the products of one company are lasting on average longer than the products of another company, then I think it is safe for you to assume that the company making the longer lasting product is investing more materials. It's investing more materials, more hardware. So you could have the same materials, but one company is investing more of it than another one. So what answer does that tell you?
Common.
You have the same product, you have the same material, but it is invested more in one product.
Concomitant variation.
Concomitant variation.
Yeah, that's concomitant variation. Concomitant variation. So what we're talking about is difference in degrees of the investment of the hardware. You know. One of the reasons why Michael succeeds where others have failed is that he studies his problems carefully before taking action. This is an example of Brown.
Say common thread.
Common thread. Why common thread?
Yes, because they said he studies his problems carefully before taking action, which means it is something that Michael always does when he has a problem.
Yeah, that's a good one. You are talking about what Michael does that runs through all his actions. Yeah, that's a good way, a good one. But when you look at the sentence, you see that the sentence is not considering, um, the sentence is comparing Mike to others.
Other people.
You see that the sentence is comparing Mike to others,
Yes, sir.
asking why Michael succeeds and others fail. So, what does that tell you? It tells you that there is one difference among others.
Yes, sir.
So, there are two things. What Michael does that runs through all his actions, and then the comparison between Mike and his friends. Mike's friends fail, only Mike succeeds. So between these two ways of analyzing the problem, which one would you rather choose? Because you have two ways. Now, I think when you look at when you look at the question, you ask yourself, what does the examiner really want?
Yes.
You
So
can
then I'll
see
go for relevant friend.
from the way the question was written, you can see that the examiner is wanting you to compare Mike to others who
Other
failed.
people.
So you just give the examiner relevant difference.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Male soccer teams from Cameroon are always filled with tall, hard-bodied men. My father said it's because of the prominence of plantain, a key provider of zinc in the average Cameroonian diet. This is an example of a. Yeah, someone raised his hand, but you don't have a name. So can you answer the question?
Can I please?
Yeah, Brown, go ahead. Look at the question
Uh,
carefully. Check the phrases in the question that show you the answer. What are the phrases in the what is the phrase or phrases? I think it's one phrase.
The prominence of plantain.
Prominence of
Out
plantain.
Yeah, not just that. The prominence of plantain in what?
in the average Cameroonian diet.
Oh, yeah. Then
Okay, so what does average tell you?
Tells you of the degree or intensity of the plantain based diet.
The average tells you that almost every Cameroonian is eating plantain in a prominent way. So if almost every Cameroonian is eating plantain, then what is the answer?
Concomitant variation.
Concomitant.
Yeah, but I think in this case you are looking at
common thread. Common
you are
thread.
looking at what the people are doing, what is running through the people.
Common thread.
Common thread.
Yeah, so you have to take common thread because they've told you the average Cameroonian. So the average Cameroonian means that almost every Cameroonian. And remember that the average Cameroonian could also mean every Cameroonian. You know. It has been discovered that living longer is associated with low protein intake at middle age and moderate to high protein intake in old age. This study was actually done by Levin et al. 2014. This is an example of
concomitant variation. Concomitant variation.
Concomitant
yeah,
variation.
yeah, that's good. So can you explain? Can you teach me why you selected that?
Yeah,
Because they are talking.
because it talks about you can live without based on the degree of protein that you take. So it's comparing the degree of something. So it's concomitant here.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. For you to know the answer, you check protein, the issue of protein. Now, so there are certain questions you need to ask yourself about protein. Now, is protein present in every meal? Do we take protein? Do we all take protein? Is there an instance of someone who doesn't eat protein? So the answer
Highly
is
unlikely.
no. Because you can't even survive by avoiding protein. And and in fact, as a matter of fact, most of the carbohydrate foods also have protein, except that their protein content is very low. So all this rice, yam, cassava, they have protein, but the protein is very small. You know, so it means that protein is present in all our food, and that makes it a question of degree. So now you talk about high level of protein, low level of protein. So that leads you directly to the answer. So in these exercises, we are learning how to answer these questions because very soon you'll be facing a firing squad in your examination hall. Okay, now let's do causal fallacies or fallacies of causal reasoning or bad causal reasoning. So these fallacies are committed when the link between an alleged cause and alleged effect, is based on a causal link that does not exist. So a causal fallacy is when there appears to be a causal link, but there actually is no causal link. Let's look at these fallacies. The first one is called the post hoc ego propter hoc. Post hoc ego propter hoc, or the fallacy of inferring causality from chronology. Now, chronology means time, the passage of time, one thing happening before the other. That's chronology. Example, for the first time today, I took beans for my breakfast. For the first time today, I took beans for breakfast and I performed wonderfully in my mathematics test. Therefore, a breakfast of beans is very crucial to mathematical proficiency. So this is a fallacy of, because the beans came before the test. This becomes the fallacy of thinking that whenever beans happens before test, the test will be good. So that's why we call it the fallacy of inferring causality from chronology. The fact that something happened before another thing doesn't mean it caused it. You attended a church service before, before you went to you went to a lottery. You attended a church service before a lottery and you won the lottery and maybe you won $2 million. Therefore, attending a church service will causes you to win a lottery. Is that true? It can be true.
No.
So
Not possible.
it's not all the time that something happens before something that it caused it. Okay, so non-causal pro-causal, or the fallacy of exchanging or confusing cause for effect. So you assume that a cause is in fact an effect, and effect is in fact a cause, exchanging cause for effect. Example, Michael is a poor student because he performs poorly in examinations. Correct the fallacy. Michael performs poorly in examinations because he's a poor student. Look at the difference between the two. So the reason why Michael performs poorly in examination is because he's a poor student, not the other way around. Now, oversimplified cause. Oversimplified cause occurs when there are many causes and the argument identifies only one of them as the cause. When there are many causes and the argument argues that only one of them is the cause. Example, the Cameroonian team won a trophy because their coach is paid a higher salary. The Cameroonian team won the trophy because their coach is paid a higher salary. This is just like saying that if Saudi Arabia pays their national team the highest salary in the world, then automatically the Saudi Arabia team will win the next World Cup. So this is a fallacy of selecting only one cause as a cause when there are many causes. There are many causes of victory. A team whose coach is paid a poor salary can win if the coach has a higher motivation compared to higher paid coaches. Okay, so there's a little problem with the internet, but we are almost done. False common thread. When we infer a common thread as a cause when it is not. Okay, false common thread. When we infer a common thread, oh shit. when we infer a common thread as a cause when it is not. Example, all the academically bright guys in my class have cars. So I'll get a car as part of my desire to be academically bright. So this is the fallacy of associating the wrong false common thread. So you notice that all the academically bright guys in your class have cars. You still need further investigations to know whether just having a car will make you academically bright. Confusing correlation with causation. Relationship between them. Example, each time a car moves, we see smoke from the exhaust tube. Therefore, the smoke causes the car to move. Each time a car moves, we see smoke coming from the exhaust tube. Therefore, the smoke causes the car. The smoke is not what causes the car to move. Both the movement of the car and the smoke are caused by the engine combustion. So the fact that you see two things happening together all the time doesn't mean that one of them must be causing the other. So correlation is when two things always happen together. But we're saying that correlation does not always mean causation. Slippery slope. When we suggest that a relatively insignificant event will cause a more significant event, which in turn would cause an even more significant event, and the order of significance continues to increase without adequate justification as to why each significant event will lead to a more significant event. So what you have is a progressively dubious chain of consequences, often employed to support a conclusion or claim. When you argue that if something is allowed to take place, it will cause something that is more significant or more serious, and then that thing will also cause something that is more serious again, and then just things continue to escalate. This is the fallacy of arguing that if A is allowed, it will trigger a set of events that will eventually lead to Z. And it's only a matter of time to go from A to Z, to slip down a slippery slope from A to Z. Now, this should not be a fallacy if the movement from A to Z is justified. Sometimes it is justified. But it is a fallacy if the causal movement is not justified or even justifiable, which means that it is what we call fatalism, an extreme version of determinism. First example, if Donald Trump becomes the president, America will fight many wars. This was the argument of some Democrats in the USA during the 2016 presidential election campaign. Second example, it is wrong to believe in God because then you would eventually believe in not just God but all kinds of spirits. And then you come to believe that spirits have all kinds of power. And then you come to believe that inanimate objects have spirits, which is animism. And then you come to believe that everything with spirits and power has spirits and power to do something. And then that destroys your ability to evaluate cause and effect in natural terms. So this argument is that if you believe in God, eventually the belief will destroy your ability to evaluate cause and effect in natural terms, because you end up believing that every cause is spiritual, and things like that. But you can believe in God without even progressing to the next stage, which is to believe in spirits and powers. Some people believe in God, but they don't believe in spirits. They just believe only God exists. We don't have spirits. Some believe in God and spirits, but they don't believe that inanimate objects have spirits. And so, for the example, I cannot allow my child to go outdoors and play in a compound. This is because if I do, she will jump fence and go into the streets. If she goes into the streets, she will run away with any stranger. If she runs away with any stranger, then I will never see her again. If I never see her again, then I'll be miserable for the rest of my life. If I'm miserable for the rest of my life, I'll commit suicide. So for the purpose of the avoidance of suicide, I will not allow my child to play outdoors in my compound. So this argument alleges a whole chain of effects down to suicide if I allow my child to play in the compound. So that's what we call the fallacy of slippery slope. We call it slippery slope because it essentially alleges a slippery slope. Once you come to the head of this slope, then you must slip down to the bottom, which is not always the case. Okay, so a little exercises again for our relaxation. I noticed that most of the great people in this country attended the Achimota High School. So I will attend that school because I want to be like them. I noticed that most of the great people in this country attended Achimota High School. So I will attend that school because I want to be like them. Brown.
Oversimplified cause.
Oversimplified course. Yeah, so lecture us on how you arrived at that.
Because that could not only be the reason why people in the country are great people. He's only basing on just one factor out of many factors that allow people to be great people.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, becoming a great person takes much more than attending a high school. I mean, they also attended universities, and not everyone who attended university is great. And so greatness takes a whole lot of things. So that's good. Russia's military is more powerful than the terrorist organization because the military destroyed the organization last week. This is an example of what? I think this is simple.
Non cosa pro cosa.
Non-causa pro causa. Non-causa pro causa. So let's reverse the parts of the sentence. Russia's military destroyed the organization last week because Russia's military is more powerful than the organization. All right. I remember you visited a native doctor in January. That must be the reason behind the problems you are having with your business. This is an example of
Post hoc propter ego hoc.
That's correct. Post hoc ego propter hoc. Alleging that someone is doing well or not doing well because the person visited a native doctor. All right, that's good. You can attribute Gabriel's success as a lawyer to the support he receives from his wife. This is an example of what?
Oversimplified cause.
Oversimplified cause. Okay, can you explain a little bit how that answer emerged?
Maybe it's not only the support he received from his wife that made him a successful lawyer.
Oh, that's good, and that's great. I mean, even a lot of lazy men receive support from their wives, So receiving support from your wife is not all that it's not all it takes to be successful. Even though it's one of them, but it's definitely not all. Each time I win a game of chess at the club, I happen to have mistakenly used the wrong key to attempt to lock my front door. Each time I win a game of chess at the club, I happen to have mistakenly used the wrong key to attempt to lock my front door. So whenever I mistakenly use the wrong key to lock my front door, I know I'll win a game of chess at the club. This is an example of
False common thread.
False common thread.
False common thread.
false.
Spell it out soon.
Yeah, false common thread. It's alleging a common thread running through the events of winning chess. All right. So that's the end of the class. I'll be happy to receive questions. And when we are done discussing your questions, then we'll hang up whilst I retrieve the recording. And then we, you know, prepare for our next class next week. So, any questions?
Sir,
Yes, go ahead.
please, the example that most great people attended Achimota's too. So I want to be. Please, can you bring that example again?
Yeah, the example is saying that Achimota School, attending Achimota School makes people great. So all you need to be great is just attend Achimota High School.
Please, can the answer also be false common thread? Because most people attended Achimota school and they are great people. He also wants to be like them. But someone said it's oversimplified and he said it was correct. And I wanted to verify. Me, I thought it was false common thread.
Yeah, false common thread is also a good answer. But when you look at the question, you'll see that someone wants to attend Achimota High School so that the person will be great. So when you see that last sentence about wanting to attend Achimota High School, then it tells you that the examiner is thinking of oversimplified course, because that last sentence betrays the examiner's thinking. He's indirectly showing you that attending that high school is not enough to be great. So between the two answers, the two answers are credible. And by the way, as you have seen from these exercises, you can have two causal fallacies occurring in the same problem, but what you have to decide is which one is the examiner thinking about. And to find that out, you need to look at the question very carefully and then put yourself in the examiner's shoes. Then you see what answer the examiner wants you to choose. So both of them are very good candidates. It then boils down to what you suspect the examiner wants.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I'm proceeding to stop the recording.